little children, oh take me away into a land of enchantment. Come little children, the time's come to play here in my garden of shadow.
Hey everybody, this is LA Knight, and I am back with a review of the book Worlds of Ink and Shadow by Lena Coakley. Now, Worlds of Ink and Shadow is about the four Bronte siblings. I already knew that Charlotte and Emily Bronte were sisters, obviously. And I heard that they had a sister named Anne, like, a couple of years ago, and then I found out that actually she was a writer, too. What I didn't know until I read this book, and then it also said that this was actually a fact, is that they had a brother named Branwell, which I didn't know. And so I actually learned a little bit more about them as people than I expected to from this book, considering that this book is fiction. But they actually talk about, at the end of the book, what's real, what isn't. I mean, obviously, the stuff that isn't real, a lot of it is very obvious, because it's all fantastical and magical and shit. But, and it's a very interesting book. Now, for those of you who don't know, Charlotte Bronte wrote Jane Eyre, and then Emily Bronte wrote Wuthering Heights. And they've written other things, but those are the things that made them famous. And then Anne Bronte wrote some stuff, but I don't know what it is, because I haven't read them. I believe I have a book. Maybe I don't. I'm looking at my shelves right now. And, oh, no I don't. I thought I had the Barnes & Noble Bronte Sisters leather-bound, classic collector's edition thing, but I don't. I'll have to get that. And so that has something by Anne Bronte in it, but I don't know what it is. And, so I always thought it was cool that, to have two sisters so close in age who both wrote very similar kinds of work and, wrote together, especially at a time when women writing novels was like a huge deal. There's a thing on Tumblr about for too long in history Anonymous was a woman. That's actually true. There's another book that I read where a gentlewoman in Regency England wanted to write a novel, and she did, and to get it published, to avoid any kind of quote-unquote scandal touching her family name, she had to publish it under the name a Derbyshire lady. She would get the money and stuff, but nobody would know she wrote it, because it was such a huge deal. Women didn't write novels because it was considered scandalous and bad, and also, this is the thing, it's like women shouldn't write novels at the time because it was scandalous and bad, but also women couldn't write novels because nobody would read them, and it's like, I don't know, I feel like there's some male egos in the works here fucking things up, but I could be wrong. I'm probably not, but I could be. And, so the book Worlds of Ink and Shadow is about the original writings of the Bronte siblings when they were kids. Now, Branwell Bronte, the brother, never actually published a novel, but he did write a lot when he was young. And the thing that's sad is the only thing that he's really famous for is painting a portrait of his three sisters. It's hanging up in a museum in England somewhere. And the book is about how the two oldest siblings, Branwell and Charlotte, their world that they have created, this world called Verdopolis, has come to life, and they can cross over to Verdopolis, whenever they start writing. Like, a door will appear and they can cross over and participate in the stories as they happen and direct the scenes, but then the characters in the book start coming to life and realizing that they're being manipulated by these people, but they don't realize it's this group of kids. They think that it's like these magical beings. And slowly over the course of the book, the world starts to get away from them and they start getting into trouble. And then they realize that because of this, they have to stop writing. But you find out that the reason that they have this power is not because they, were born with it or whatever, but because they made a deal with this ancient power. You don't know what it is. I thought at first it was supposed to be the devil, but it's not the devil. It's some kind of weird being that, doesn't really have any definitive mythology attached to it, called Old Tom, who gave them the ability to cross over to this world and create it, but in exchange for every time they cross over, it shaves a day off their lifespan. And they've gone over, and it's not just every time they go over and then come back they lose a day. It's every time they go through the door they lose a day. So they've gone over and then come back thousands and thousands of times. You find out that historically the Bronte siblings all died fairly young. Charlotte Bronte ended up dying at age 40, but the other Bronte siblings all died in their 20s and early 30s. Charlotte Bronte died like right before her 40th birthday. And so in the book is like explaining in a fantastical way why that happened. It's because they have this power. And the worlds that they create, it's very interesting because the worlds that they created are actually based on the real writings of the Bronte siblings when they were kids, which I think is really interesting because you see, like, people who write, you can tell the difference most of the time between the fanfics, as an example, that you wrote when you were, like, 12, and the fanfiction you wrote when you were 22, and the fanfiction you wrote when you're 32. And so it's very interesting to see, basically, these, like, it reads like mediocre fanfiction, almost, the worlds that they created and the things that they're doing with these characters, but you also see how their real-life experiences are influencing what they've done. And their real-life expectations influence, like, the stories that they write. And so it's very interesting. You also see the germs of the novels that made the two Bronte sisters who are most famous. There's a character named Zamorna in the book that comes to life, and you can see in him the seeds of Mr. Rochester, the male lead from Jane Eyre. There's a character called Alexander Rogue in Emily's works that she creates, and you can see in him the seeds of Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights. And it's very and also there's a little bit of interesting commentary on cultural appropriation in the works, which I really like, because when they were kids, like, they start writing when they're like 7 or 8 years old, and they set this story, this world on the coast of Africa, but they don't know anything about Africa. And Anne actually comments on the fact that one of the things that she doesn't like about her sister's writings and her brother's is that they set this world on the coast of Africa, but they never deal with any Africans unless they're, like, they want to write about a war. And then suddenly the Africans pop up. And, you know, other than that, it's like they're living in England, basically. Like, the climate, like, and then as the story goes on, the other girls realize, you know, hey, this actually really is just like England except with palm trees. Maybe we shouldn't have done this. This is, like, very immature of us. I thought that was kind of funny. Like, you know, very, very tongue-in-cheek, like, hey, you guys who don't do your research. Hey, look, see, I see you. Yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. I really liked this story. I thought it could have been longer, but I understand why it wasn't. I really liked the idea that everything comes with a price, and, like, that the price isn't necessarily something that you might expect. Because another character in the book, who actually doesn't really pop up very often, she's actually only mentioned, but you find out that old Tom tried to make a deal with her, and the price he asked for was the color of her eyes. But the price that he asked of the Bronte siblings was a day off of their life. And it's really interesting how I thought that was kind of interesting. The exploration of, like, when you don't have a lot, how everything that you create, like, really has an important place in your heart, and how you can want something so badly that you might throw away caution and do really stupid shit to get it. I really thought that was interestingly explored. Emily is not one of the two siblings who crosses over to this magical world until she realizes how her siblings have done it up until that point. And then she makes a similar deal, except her deal is every day that her siblings... she actually doesn't know what her siblings gave. She just knows that they gave something. And so what she says is, everything that my siblings have given, and everything that they will give for every time they cross over, I will give for a single crossing. And so she cuts her life almost in half to go to her world once. And it's really interesting, and also, like, it talks about how, like, girls can realistically fall in love with fictional characters, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it's actually totally understandable. Emily did not create the character of Alexander Rogue, but she fell in love with him. Charlotte and her brother actually created Rogue, and then Emily is like, you know, I think he'd be better if you, like, tweaked him like this, and did this, and blah, 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 and that's the Rogue she falls in love with, and it's like the fanfic version of Rogue, and when she crosses over, suddenly Rogue transforms into that character. And I thought that was really... it talks about, like, the transformative value of fan fiction and the power of fan ideation, and I thought that was really, really cool, actually. Excuse me. Like, this whole book basically is like a love letter to the Brontes, but also to fan fiction and writing, and yeah, I really liked that. Now, that being said, and also I would totally recommend this book, but that being said, there is one thing that I didn't like, and it's actually not a flaw in the book, it's just something that I've noticed in a lot of books. When a kid gets the ability to bring a world that they wrote about or imagined to life, there's always a prize, and it turns out the world actually sucks and they shouldn't have done it. And I'm getting tired of that. You see that in Nevermore. I've seen it in some other books, but not as often, because after Nevermore, I got kind of upset, and so I started avoiding books like that, and I didn't realize that Worlds of Ink and Shadow was going to be like that, and then it turned out it was, and so I was like, damn it, but I ended up liking it enough that I didn't care, and I'm going to keep the book. But I'm tired of seeing that. It's let kids have a world that they, don't make escapism a bad thing. And I don't think Lena Coakley did that on purpose. I don't think that she was trying to say escapism is bad. But that's kind of the impression that I got from the work. And I don't like that, because as a kid, that was all I really had. I read and wrote all the time as a kid, because my real world life sucked. Doesn't suck now, but it sucked so bad when I was, a kid. And that's why I wrote all the time. I wrote original stuff, I wrote fan fiction, I read all the things that ever were ever, basically. I read all the time because I wanted to escape my life. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so I'm tired of seeing that as, a tool of demonification, for lack of a better way to express that concept, in books. I'm getting tired of that. I want to see a kid who opens up a world, creates a world, goes to it, and the price for going isn't bad. And that there's nothing wrong with going there. The only time I've seen that is, I forget who wrote the book, but it's called The Kingdom of Kevin Malone, and it's an old book from the 70s or 80s. But the thing is that the main character is not the person who created the world. Her arch enemy in school is. It's his world, and for some reason she's needed to save it, and so these two kids who hate each other have to work together. And she realizes that and it talks about, that one, because of when it came out, was actually pretty revolutionary. It talks about how, the reason kids are bullies is a lot of times because they're being abused at home, or they're exposed to, super, super negative behavior, or whatever. And so that, was really interesting, but at the same time, it's yeah, okay, but why couldn't the girl create the world? I wanted that instead. But it was interesting because it was, Jewish girl, Jewish protagonist, and, super badass and did all the things and saved the world, even though, it was a patriarchal world that had been created by this boy. Then, she's the one who ended up saving it. I thought that was cool, but that's the only book I've ever seen where a kid created a fantasy world that came to life and then, didn't have to suffer extremely for indulging himself in it. And I would like to see that happen more often. So yeah, so that's my review of Worlds of Ink and Shadow. I would definitely recommend it, especially if you like historical fantasy. Especially if you're a fan of the Bronte siblings. I think it's really interesting. It's a really interesting book. I really liked it. And I learned a lot about the Bronte siblings that I didn't know before. And I think that a lot of people, I think everyone should read it unless, you just really don't like this kind of book. So yeah, I will talk to you guys in the next podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. Have you read this book? Are you going to read this book? What did you think of my review? Did you agree with my points? Have you come across any books where kids created magical worlds and got to go there without, having to pay an arm and a leg? I would really like to know, because I'd really like to read them. Thanks, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye!